If you believe Donald Trump was just another politician bound by traditional rules of engagement, what you are about to hear will change that permanently. By midnight, the broadcast had generated over 2 million live tweets, completely overwhelming the network's internal metrics. By morning, the raw, unedited opening had been clipped and shared across every major digital platform, defying explicit corporate mandates. By the following week, the entire concept of federal broadcast regulation had been dragged out of the shadows and exposed to the unforgiving light of late-night television. All of it started because one administration assumed a formal warning letter would successfully terrorize a comedian into silence. The atmospheric pressure inside the El Capitan Entertainment Center feels entirely wrong for a comedy show, the air hanging heavy, thick, and undeniably electric. The brilliant studio lights push 2 stops brighter than normal, washing the iconic desk in an unforgiving, clinical illumination that bleaches the usual relaxed warmth from the audience. Jimmy Kimmel is already positioned at his mark, his posture perfectly still, his eyes scanning the crowd with the quiet, absolute control of a broadcaster holding the detonator to his own career. The floor director stands in the shadows near the camera bank, his headset pushed entirely off his ear, sensing a massive, legally perilous deviation from the network-approved teleprompter. There is no gentle bass line playing underneath his opening remarks, no polite industry laughter. The complete absence of sound acts as a suffocating physical presence. Donald Trump's entrance into the narrative happens not in person, but through the suffocating weight of his appointed proxies, his power attempting to claim the territory of the studio from Washington, D.C. The screen behind Kimmel flickers to life, displaying FCC Chairman Brendan Carr on a conservative podcast, leaning into his microphone with a smirk heavily disguised as regulatory authority. We can do this the easy way or the hard way. The broadcast shifts to a relentless digital barrage from Trump himself, his posts projected on the screen in a deliberate rhythm designed to overwhelm the acoustic space of the studio. Without me enforcing the rules, these failing networks would just broadcast absolute garbage every single night. His text reads, the digital words echoing sharply through the public consciousness. He pivots seamlessly to a deeply personal dismissal, waving away Kimmel's previous suspension, while calling him just another overrated partisan desperately clinging to a desk because he cannot accept that the country has rejected him. He claims total authority over the airwaves, loudly reminding the silent digital room that he dictates broadcast licenses, runs the regulatory agencies, and certainly does not need to tolerate a lecture from a comedian who insulted his supporters. People tune in because they want absolute winners, and quite frankly, there is nobody left on that network who even knows what winning looks like anymore, he concludes, his digital footprint crossing its arms definitively. Through this entire recorded and projected onslaught, Jimmy Kimmel stays completely, terrifyingly silent on stage. He simply watches the monitor, his expression an unreadable mask of absolute calculation. A prominent network lawyer in the third row nervously adjusts his collar, the collective tension in the room becoming a physical weight. The silence stretches out, turning the administration's booming rhetoric into a hollow echo chamber of its own profound insecurity. Then Kimmel finally moves. He shifts his weight slightly, leaning his forearms against the polished desk, and when he speaks, his voice drops significantly lower, entirely devoid of his usual late-night projection. You keep talking about power, but power doesn't usually need this much defending. The studio instantly goes dead quiet, the air freezing in the lungs of every single attendee. The massive production screen behind him bypasses the show's glossy graphics package to display a raw, scanned image of an official, watermarked document. It is the final warning letter from the FCC, explicitly threatening ABC's broadcast licenses if Kimmel's content is not immediately reined in. Displayed here in stark, high-definition silence, 50 feet wide on a comedy broadcast, the buried threat lands like a physical blow to the First Amendment. Kimmel does not raise his voice. He simply asks a devastating question about how an administration claiming absolute strength relies on the architecture of backdoor corporate extortion to sustain it. Trump's immediate digital response, triggered the moment the broadcast hits the East Coast feed, is a loud denial of censorship, calling the letter a routine legal inquiry, manufactured into a crisis by a failing host. Kimmel counters calmly on live television, letting the digital denial hang in the dead air for a brutal 5-second pause before he quietly signals the control booth. A low murmur ripples through the audience, a collective realization that the host is burning the network's legal cover live on the air. Kimmel reaches slowly beneath his desk, moving with the deliberate precision of a surgeon operating on an exposed nerve. He places a plain manila folder on the surface, opening it to reveal certified emails from network executives, desperately trying to figure out how to force Kimmel to apologize to appease the administration. The camera pushes in tight on the documents, an undeniable, physical manifestation of the chilling effect. The screen behind him shifts again, displaying a meticulously documented visual timeline connecting the exact minute of Carr's podcast threat to a simultaneous aggressive surge in panic from local affiliate stations. The administration's digital surrogates try to talk over the visual evidence online, their rhetoric rising in pitch as they dismiss the timeline as a desperate partisan hoax. Kimmel slows his cadence down even further on stage, forcing the room to absorb the sheer weight of the verified corporate panic. The tension in the studio is so thick it feels actively dangerous. A raw audio recording suddenly overrides the house sound system. It is a captured voicemail left on a network server just hours before the broadcast. An administration official's voice, stripped of equalization, explicitly ordering an ABC executive to pull Kimmel off the air entirely before the monologue begins. The audience is physically hit by the recording, a collective, sharp intake of breath vibrating through the stadium's seating. Trump posts frantically that the audio is illegally obtained and heavily spliced by deep state operatives. Kimmel does not argue. He simply displays the digital forensic verification from an independent cybersecurity firm on the main screen, proving the file is entirely, unequivocally unaltered. A door near the stage-left curtain opens, and two individuals walk slowly into the spotlight. The first is a former network standards liaison, a young man whose testimony is entirely procedural, detailing exactly how he was ordered to draft a public statement claiming Kimmel's previous suspension was a mutual, creative decision rather than government pressure. I rehearsed walking away 6 times in the parking garage before I finally found the courage to quit, the liaison admits, his voice shaking but remarkably controlled. Trump aggressively attacks the young man's credibility online, yelling that he was fired for gross incompetence. The liaison absorbs the digital assault by standing perfectly still on stage, his physical presence magnifying the administration's absolute desperation. Then, the second witness steps to the microphone. She was a senior legal assistant, a woman forced to draft the compliance responses to the FCC while under the suffocating weight of a strict non-disclosure agreement. Her testimony is emotionally devastating, detailing the intense isolation and the profound professional cost of enforcing a public lie to protect a corporate broadcast license. Her throat works visibly before the words finally come, her fingers gripping the microphone stand until her knuckles are entirely colorless, a tear slipping down her cheek without her wiping it away. Trump posts furiously, his digital tone flushed dark red, shouting that she is a traitor, betraying the loyalty of the network. The assistant looks directly into the camera, her voice breaking but laced with absolute titanium. They didn't buy my silence, they rented it, and the lease just expired. The audience does not cheer or scream. They break. One person in the front row stands up, clapping slowly. Another joins. Within seconds, the room is consumed by a slow, deliberate wave of applause, not for the late-night host, but for the truth finally breathing in the open. The main screen splits in half, displaying the domestic FCC timeline on the left and on the right, matching internal network logs, proving the administration's direct attempts to orchestrate a permanent cancellation. The alignment is absolute and undeniable. Trump's online denials shift frantically from screaming fake news to yelling that the servers were illegally hacked, a desperate pivot that exposes the sheer, naked panic beneath his anger. His digital collapse unfolds across multiple, undeniable metrics. The frequency of his posts becomes heavily erratic, his rhetoric rising and falling in rapid, shallow bursts of capitalization. His arguments, previously gripping a semblance of executive authority, begin wiping frantically at the narrative, attempting to claim he never cared about the show in the first place. His digital posture slumps inward, his broad threat stiffening and shrinking as he leans away from the visual evidence of the massive 50-foot warning letter dominating the trending topics. His focus darts aggressively around the platform, refusing to settle on Kimmel, the witnesses, or the raw documents, eventually going completely, terrifyingly silent. His verbal progression spirals from confident denial to accusing Kimmel of an illegal ambush, dropping into a procedural complaint about internet regulations, attempting a weak burst of bravado about his own poll numbers, and finally landing in total, absolute quiet. Kimmel looks directly into the camera, his expression entirely neutral. The documents are on the table. The timeline is on the screen. The witnesses spoke. Your move. Trump's feed remains completely still. The aftermath escapes the studio like a controlled detonation. Backstage, the veteran network executives stand completely frozen, their phones lighting up as they watch the online metrics in stunned disbelief. Trump's lead communications aide is seen typing so frantically on his phone that autocorrect sends pure nonsense to the press pool for 3 straight messages. Within 8 minutes, the first unauthorized clip of the monologue hits the internet. Within 20 hours, the full forbidden segment reaches millions of views, each click spreading at viral velocity. Cable news networks immediately cut into their programming, their graphics departments frantically rebuilding the timeline of the censorship with red arrows and annotations. Anchors replay Kimmel's defiance, allowing his thematic anchor word to sit on the screen for a full segment without adding their own commentary. Trump's counterattack begins hours later in a series of escalating rage posts. But beneath every frantic denial, users reply with screenshots of the exact FCC letter, proving the architecture of his intimidation. The public shift is instantaneous. People are no longer debating the politics of the joke. They are dissecting the psychology of an administration whose entire censorship facade shattered on live television. The assistant's testimony about rented silence becomes a global caption, trending worldwide as the definitive summary of the night. The story does not end with a sudden confession or a reversed policy. It burns slow, a digital fire that cannot be contained by late-night executive orders or legal threats. Because an architecture built on corporate fear only holds until someone finally refuses to look away. If this changed how you see power, hit subscribe. If it didn't, watch it again. The details you missed the first time are the ones that matter most. Notifications on. Next one drops soon.